All right. So you're here last week. You kind of remember. I kind of want to refocus myself. One of the things I know, many of you guys who've been here for a long time will remember back many years ago. I used to say almost every Sunday, I'm not preaching to you. I'm preaching to me. Every time I get up here to preach, I'm telling you what I need to hear, what I need to work on, what I need help with. And somewhere along the line, about the last maybe year and a half, 2 years, that stopped. I started telling you what I wanted you to hear. I started preaching what I thought you needed to know, because I needed you to know what I know and think like I think and believe like I believe. And I kind of lost my way a little bit. And I wanted to get back to who I am as a preacher, who I am as a follower of Christ, and who I am as a father and a husband and a pastor. And so it's taken me back into some of my roots. I've spent a lot of time the last couple of weeks with a dear friend of mine by now. It really does feel like I've known the guy. He's been dead 50 years, but it feels like I've known him. His name's Thomas Merton. Spent a lot of time with him over the last couple of weeks because when I was first introduced to the work of Thomas Merton in 2010, I immersed myself. Some of you guys remember I went to spend a weekend at a monastery. Steve Vossi used to joke with me all the time about being a monk because I went to a monastery, and I was a part of that group called the Next Generation of Merton Scholars, and we did some touring around the area presenting different things on Thomas Merton. And then I just kind of lost my way. I started getting sucked in to all the noise, all the debates that are going on, the theological debates, the political debates, all that noise. It's just noise. It's not meaningful. It's meaningless. It's just noise. And so I want to get back to who I am and starting to just refocus myself on what is my purpose, what is my calling, and sharing some of the things out of there. And so one of the things I did a couple weeks ago is just spend a lot of time in prayer. Just, God, what have you called me to do? Where have you called me to be? What is it that you want me to know? And the answer was that a contemplative awareness of Christ's presence in my life every single day. And that's the only thing I can share from. That's the only thing that I can know. Is just the awareness, the contemplative. What does that mean? It just means an active awareness of the present moment. Being presently aware that Christ is always present in my life. Every moment of every day, He is right there. And then the question is, and then what do I do out of that? How do I live in that? Do I just keep it all to myself? What do I do with it? And so last week we spent a little bit of time in Philippians chapter 2, where Paul says, do nothing from emptiness or do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind regard one another as more important than yourself. Do not merely look out for your own personal interest, but the interest of others. And so how do I live that out? I start to regard other people as more important than myself. I start putting the interest of others ahead of the interest of myself. And so as I began to think about that as this week went on, it drew me to the message of Jesus in Matthew 16, verse 24, when Jesus addresses this very thing. And Jesus says this, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? So if anybody, now once again, please understand, none of this is mandatory. None of this is mandatory. If all you want to do is say magic words, recite a magic prayer, and to show up at church every Sunday, that's fine. I'm not going to get mad at you, and God's not going to get mad at you. It is what it is. But if you truly want to live a Christian life, and you want to claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ, these are the things you will do. Because how many people here, and you don't have to raise your hands, but how many here would claim in your mind that I want to be a follower of Jesus Christ, right? And hopefully if I did ask you to show your hands, all your hands would go up. If I asked how many of us really want to live a Christian lifestyle, how many people in this room, and once again, I'm hoping everybody's hand would go up. But what does it mean to live a Christian lifestyle? What does it mean to be a follower of Christ? Once again, last week, everything was focused on Paul saying, for me to live is Christ, but to die is gain. Meaning if I die, I gain. I don't have to be here. I don't have to worry about the political ads and all the noise and all the nonsense because I'm gone. I'm not in this world anymore. And that's a pretty good deal sometimes. But for me to live is Christ. And what does that mean? It means for me to live is to suffer. For me to live is to serve. For me to live is to sacrifice. Now, when I say suffer, I'm not saying that we go out and we physically hurt ourselves, but it's a suffering of service and sacrifice. Everything we do for the other, whether we get anything out of it in return or not. Because what did Jesus Christ do? Jesus Christ loved us, and his love was so pure and so holy. It was what we call agape love. Agape love. Other-centered, self-giving. Okay? Once again, I've said this before. I don't love you because of what you do for me. I love you because of what you let me do for you. That's love. I don't love my wife because she cleans up after me and makes money and does all these wonderful things for me. I love her because every single day she lets me. That's true love. And whether we want it or not, Jesus gives it to us. We hate Jesus. We despise Jesus. We call for Jesus to be killed, and he does it. He lets us murder him. And while we're in the process of murdering him, he says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they do. I'm going to let them kill me so I can demonstrate to them how I'm going to give them exactly what they think they want. Me dead. Oh, by the way, 3 days later, I'm coming back to show them it wasn't enough. Even after you kill me, I'm still not changing my mind about you. Even after you kill me, I'm still not giving up on you. And now for those of you who've heard this story and believe this story, if you want to follow me, great. Pick up your cross and do the same thing that I did. It's right there for you to pick up. You want to be a follower of Jesus Christ? First thing you have to do is deny yourself. Anybody who wants to have his life must first have to get rid of his life, right? What does it exactly say? For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. So all of us were created in the image of God. Before the foundation of the world, God predestined all of us for a plan and a purpose that he drew up before the foundation of the world. It's in Colossians. But then, we get birthed into the world. And the world begins to create us in its image. The world begins to create us for the plan and purpose that it wants us to have, which is contrary to the plan and purpose to what God wants us to have. And so we have this self, this false self that was crafted and created into the image of the world. And we think this is who we are. We've spent all of our life listening to the chickens. Tell us we're not good enough. Tell us we don't belong. Tell us what we need to do to be accepted. Telling us what we need to change to be accepted. Telling us what kind of clothes we have to wear. What kind of makeup we have to buy. What kind of car we want to drive. How big our house needs to be. We spend all of our time listening to the chickens, crafting us in their image of who they want us to be, so that way we will not be living in the plan and purpose that God wants us to be living in. And so Jesus is saying, you need to deny that false self. You need to give up that life because that's not the life I have chosen for you. And if anybody wants to save his life, if anybody wants to follow me, they need to repent from that life. That is not who you are. You are my son, you are my daughter, and you are perfectly crafted crafted in my image. And you are good. You are inherently good. Because I said so. The world tells you otherwise. The world tells you you're bad. The world tells you you don't belong. The world tells you all these terrible things about yourself. I say you're good. I say you belong. I say, Debbie and I have had this conversation because this nonsense that we don't deserve to be loved by God just drives me crazy. But we don't deserve to be loved by God, but we don't not deserve to be loved by God. It's not so, well, I deserve God's love, but it's not, I don't deserve God's love. It's not a matter of being deserving or undeserving. It just is. God just loves you because you're His. You can't earn it. You don't deserve it. You just get it, freely flowing out of you, out of Him, into you every single day. And that's beautiful. But then what do we do with it? God, let's just go back. We'll just, was having a conversation with me yesterday and she said, why use your own words when you can just use the Bible? Fine. It is true. I mean, sometimes my words are pretty great too. I'm joking. By this is 1 John 4. We'll go to this verse, start at verse 7. 1 John 4, verse 7. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God, for God is love. By this, the love of God was manifested in us, that God has sent us His only begotten Son into the world so that we might live through Him. And this is love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son to be a propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. God pours all of this love into me, not so I will love Him back. God pours all this love into me so that way I will love you. God is constantly putting me first on His list of priorities, not so I will put Him first in my list of priorities, but so that way I will put you first in my list of priorities. Christ went to the cross, suffered the ultimate death to prove to us His love. And now He says, you don't have to follow me, but if you want to follow me, pick up your cross and let's go. But in order for you to do that, you need to deny yourself. You need to die to this false image of which the world created you in. You need to recognize and see yourself pure and holy the same way I see you. There's this book, I can't remember it now. I had to read it for seminary or something. In the book, one of the chapters that started off, I think the guy's name is Brenner. Brenner sounds right. Maybe Surrender to Love by Brenner, maybe. But one of the chapters that starts off and says, he asks the question, I want you to think about what God thinks when He thinks of you. And then he just kind of went on with the chapter, and so I was thinking about this, and the thing that I came up with when I thought about what God thinks when He thinks of me was that I never lived up to my full potential. And so I get to the end of the chapter, somewhere in the chapter, and he says, I want you to go back to that thing that you thought God thought about you. And whatever it was, get rid of it. Because the only thing God has ever thought about you is how much He loves you. When God thinks of you, He thinks back to the day before the foundation of the world in which He created you and crafted you in His image. He thinks about the day He placed you in His mother's womb. And I'm a little paraphrasing here and adding some of my own conjecture. But that was the day that He decided that He was going to love you. And He's never changed His mind about it. He never will change His mind about it. He's always thought that about you. Even if you've gone off and you've done things you shouldn't have done, even if you've lived inside of the image in which the world created you in, God never gave up on you. He never changed his mind about you. And so for those of us who have realized all this, and for those of us who have repented, because so many Christians, we claim to have repented, and we show up in church, and we do all the right things, but so many of us are still so stuck living in the false self, because I'm telling you, a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of money goes in to creating that image. I spent a lot of time, and I drank a lot of beer trying to convince people that I was this party god, that I was the life of the party, that if they were going to have a party, they had to have me there because it wouldn't be fun if I wasn't there. And I spent a lot of money making that image. I spent a lot of time crafting that image and trying to convince people that that's who I was. For nothing. That's not who I am. That's who I wanted the world to think I was. And I didn't want to give up that guy. Because finally, once I was able to convince people I was that guy, I had to give it all up. Dang it. I finally got to where I wanted to be. And God said, now it's time for a different plan. Now it's time for my plan for your life. And it's hard to give up that self, because we invest a lot in that self. But guess what? God has invested more in our true self. And it's our job to live out of our true self. We have to deny the false, live out of the true, and then we begin to pick up our cross and follow Christ. And this isn't a happy journey. By picking up our cross and following him, we're living a life of service. We're living a life of sacrifice. We're living our lives of putting other people's needs ahead of our own. We're caring about other people more than we care about ourselves. It's hard. We look at what's going on all around us. And right now, you got a kid somewhere in Elyria. And I say a kid because he's probably just a kid. And right now, at this very moment, he's wrapping a piece of rubber around his arm. Right now, it's happening. Somewhere in Elyria, right now, there's a kid wrapping rubber around his arm, getting ready to shoot heroin into his arm. Right at this very moment, it's happening. Where are we? Where are we? Claiming to be followers of Christ, coming to the only place he never went. We say we want to follow Christ. We say we want to be followers of Christ, and we recite words that he said 2,000 years ago. We follow him right to a river and get ourselves dunked in water. We follow him right to church on Sunday morning. But where is he? Several years ago, when I was at Baldwin Wallace, I had the chance to meet an amazing man named Dr. James Cone, who just passed away this last year. Dr. Cone comes from the same land as Ann. He comes from Arkansas. Right around the same time, maybe. But he probably had a very different experience of Arkansas than Ann had. He saw brothers get lynched right in front of him. He saw cops shoot and kill friends right in front of him for no other reason other than they were black. He lived in the South in the 50s in Arkansas. He literally saw people get strung up for no reason, while a crowd of people cheered on. Yay! Literally saw a cop stick a gun in somebody's mouth and pull the trigger. And somehow in the midst of all that anger and hatred, he finds God. And so he goes on and becomes a professor, PhD at Union Theological Seminary in New York, and written many, many books, and found what's called Black Liberation Theology. And they invite him to Baldwin Wallace to speak. And now at the time, I'm literally a card-carrying member of the RNC. Like, I have a card in my wallet that's signed by Rance Priebus himself, thanking me and including me in the RNC. And this guy gets up, and he starts giving this speech, this lecture, whatever you want to call it. And for the first 20 minutes, all he did was rally against the Republican Party. And I'm getting angry. I'm getting furious. And now my one professor who's sitting next to me who knows well aware of my positions is saying, hey, how are you doing with this? I'm like, yeah, you know. So then he says this. He says, I just want to let you all know, Jesus ain't in the white church. And I lost my mind. I didn't hear anything he said after that. I didn't really care. I was furious. And so then afterwards, one of the professors of the religion department came and said, hey, a few of us are going to have lunch with Dr. Cohn. Do you want to join? And I said, absolutely. This is going to be a fun lunch, right? And so I got to have lunch. Now once again, James Cone might not mean a lot to you guys. That name probably is meaningless to you. But this guy's a big deal. Like in the theological circles, like he's like Justin Bieber in theological circles. Like he's a big deal, right? So to be able to sit down at a table and have lunch with him with like 5 other people, you know, I didn't realize at the time. Now I realize, like, man, this guy's a pretty famous guy. And so I began, and he says, let me stop you right there. You have issues with what I said about Jesus not being in the white church. And I said, how did you know? And he says, you got to understand, I'm here and talking to a group of 18 to 20-year-old kids who have no idea who I am, have no idea why I'm here, and don't care why I'm here. They're here because their teacher said, if you go to this lecture and write up a report on it, I'll give you extra credit. Because I need to say something in a way that makes them stand up and be, what did he just say? So you'll listen to what I have to say. He goes, so it's an element of shock to get them to listen. And so when I say Jesus ain't in the white church, what am I saying? I'm saying Jesus isn't in church. Why do I say that? Because when Jesus was alive, where was he? He was on the street. He was in the ghettos. He was with the prostitutes and the tax collectors and the drunks. He was sitting with that kid, wrapping rubber around his arm, getting ready to shoot heroin into his veins, saying, please don't. You don't need to do that. I can take that pain away. That's where Jesus spent his time. And so once again, if we want to pick up our cross and follow him, where are we? Are we sitting next to that kid saying, hey man, there's a better way. I know you're in pain. I know the hell you're going through. I've been there myself. You don't have to do that. Let me love you the same way Jesus loved me. Let me sacrifice myself from you. Let me serve you. Now, once again, I'm not saying we sacrifice ourselves and take the needle and do the heroin for him. That's not what I'm saying. That's a bad idea, right? But we pick up that cross. Let your burdens become my burdens. Let your pain become my pain. Let your hatred become my hatred. Let your anger be my anger. And let's take it all and let's nail it under the cross, where Jesus paid the ultimate price to put to death all of those things. And so when we, as Christian people, who want to live Christian lifestyles, who want to claim to be followers of Jesus Christ, if we want to begin to really take seriously what those words mean, because words mean stuff. Words have power. And the more we become aware, contemplatively aware of Christ's presence in our life, every single moment of every single day, these things are going to begin to focus. These things are going to be able to come to us, and we're going to be able to begin to pick up our cross and follow him. But if we're just adding to the noise, and we're arguing about Republicans and Democrats, and we're arguing about atonement theories, which I have been doing a lot of, we're arguing about who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. We're arguing about whether there is a heaven or there is a hell. What we're not doing is we're not living the life Jesus called us to live. You know, many of you guys know I did that interview on that radio show, and Debbie was there, and I had to drive her home afterwards, and she just says, I just can't help but thinking, this is what God wants us to do? Absolutely not. It was the biggest waste of my time I've ever participated in, besides a couple hours a day I spent on Facebook doing the exact same thing. Every single day of my life. Just adding to the noise. Not actually contributing anything. Because once again, how many people have ever had their minds changed on Facebook? 0. Oh, 1? Okay, 1. Okay. There has to be an exception to every rule, or else the rule isn't a rule. So there always has to be at least one exception. Right? But it doesn't do, hardly doesn't do any good. We're just adding more noise to the noise, instead of living the lives in which we were created to live, instead of picking up our crosses and following Jesus. So, once again, I don't care if you want to believe in the literal eternal tormenting hell. I don't care if you want to believe in penal substitutionary atonement. I don't care what you want to believe in. Do you believe in following Jesus? Do you believe in putting the needs of others ahead of yourself? Do you want to pick up your cross and follow Jesus? Because that's all I care about anymore. I don't need to be right. I don't need to convince you that there's no such thing as an eternal tormenting hell. If that's what you want to believe it. But what I need you to do is I need you to be willing to pick up your cross and follow him. Because that's what he created you for. I need you to be willing to recognize that there's little kids all across our county that aren't going to get a Christmas because their parent is incarcerated. I need you to realize that there's guys in prison right now that have nobody to love them. And they spend all year looking forward to coming here for Thanksgiving dinner. The 1 day a year, 2 days a year that they get out of prison. And they come here. 2 days a year they get to get out of prison, and they come here. Why? Because they know they're loved here. They're not going to be judged here. People get out of prison and they come here. Why? Because they're loved here. They're accepted here. Nobody cares about what they did or how they lived their life. What we care about here is, do you want to pick up your cross and follow Jesus? Because that's all we've been called to do. And that's what I want to get back to. And once again, I'm saying this today because this is what I need to hear. Because I've lost focus. I've gotten away from the truth of what God has called me to do. I've left my foundation, and I just began to add more noise to the noise. And when you have all that noise going on, nobody can hear anything. I'm sorry, but right now, in every single commercial, I just don't understand this nonsense of, so there's two guys. One guy, all the rape kits are untested because of him. The other guy says all the rape test kits are untested because of him. It can't be both guys' fault. And chances are it's neither one of the guys' faults. But all they're doing is adding more noise to the noise, and they're both probably not true. And so, but we don't really care. All we're just hearing is noise. I can't even tell you what one issue the governor candidates of Ohio has. Because I've never heard them talk about their issues. All I've heard them do is attack the other person. And all I've ever heard anybody who supports one of them do is attack the other person. It's just noise. And then I get on these spiritual Facebook groups, these theological Facebook groups, and it's the exact same thing. But instead of candidates running for office, it's people holding different theological positions. Arminians and Calvinists and dispensationalists and universalists and penal substitutionists and Christus Victorists and supralapsarianisms and this and all this ists and isms. It's just noise. Is this what God called us to do? Is this what he created the church to do? Is to try to be right? To try to argue doctrine? Or did he create the church so he would have an army of people picking up their crosses and following him? And if I don't believe that is true, I just need to quit and just give it up and go find some forest to live in and live off the land by myself. Because every single day, I have to pick up my cross and I have to live for somebody else. Whether it's my wife, it's my kids, it's you, or it's that guy sitting there right now shooting heroin into his arm. There's a world out there of people who need us. And the world out there, they're suffering. And they're dying every day because we're taking all that love that God poured into us and we're hoarding it and keeping it to ourselves because we're afraid to go into certain neighborhoods. We're afraid to talk to certain people. Once again, shoe fits wear it kind of thing. But all I'm saying is that this little lady over here from Arkansas is not afraid to go into a prison all by herself. She isn't afraid to drive into any neighborhood and drop off food. What do we have to be afraid of? There's a world out there that's suffering because we're not willing to suffer for them and suffer with them. Jesus suffered because we were suffering. We were so blinded in our own hatred, we were so blinded in our own disgust and anger towards God, that Jesus had to suffer to show us that none of it was true. Jesus came into the world to suffer so we didn't have to. But then he says, hey, if you want to follow me, you got to do it too. So he takes all the anger and all the hatred and all the bitterness, all that suffering away. And now we get to voluntarily suffer for other people. So what are we doing? Who are we? Are we content living in the person as the person the world created us to be? Or do we want to deny that self, the false self, and live as our true self, the person that God created us to be before the foundation of the world, and then pick up our cross and follow Jesus Christ right into every single neighborhood that he goes into? Because I can tell you right now, there's a kid sitting in that chair, putting that needle in his arm, and Jesus is right there. But he can't hear Jesus because we're supposed to be the ones that are speaking for Jesus. Jesus is holding him. Jesus is trying to get him to see it. But he needs us to be his arms, his feet, his voice in the world of people who've gone deaf because of all the noise.